Alright, this post, Sacred Animals and Secret Chiefs. I said, one of the best ways to begin scientific inquiry into magical phenomena is through the same way as has been done from the dawn of humanity, which is by learning from the animals themselves. All the different species and their unique characteristics convey the natural sciences and their variety of evolved features, including electricity and bioluminescence in eels, fireflies, and fish, the aerodynamics of birds and insects, the martial armor of the turtle and beetles, and the tactics of ants and bees, etc. Many of our traditions as humans reflect those of the animals and insects who we take for granted, including the building of mound-like monuments, hive-shaped capitol buildings, and underground tunnels, like the ants who somehow instinctively know what to do and follow single file down the invisible path to carry out the great work. And so that makes me think of also just how we're killing, like I say we, but so much of human existence and life seems to want to kill out, like, not just animals but even insects, when the the ecosystem depends on those. So I don't know what I don't know, it's just something I think the effects are like completely under considered. But I probably shouldn't even just like stop and talk about that because it's just irrelevant. I mean, somewhat, except for the fact that I don't know. Never mind. Who am I to speak for the bugs? But let alone animals. But it's just like the idea of humans in this promulgation of AI and the idea of in just this statement like of becoming gods like in the whole thing, just the whole idea is just I don't want to like waste time venting what I think about how just retarded everybody is, or everything is. I'm pretty retarded too. I'm just saying it's like this terminology is really just limited. I'm limited when I say retarded, but fuck, like I don't even want to waste time, and here I am bloviating for minutes. Anyway, in a shamanic sense, each animal is a totemic emanation of the Godhead, embodying the specific elemental qualities it represents. The Egyptian tradition shows this particularly well. And Aleister Crowley notes in Chapter 12 of Part 3, Magic and Theory and Practice of Book 4, on the bloody sacrifice, that each animal, of course, can be fitted into the correspondence patterns of the Kabbalistic tree of life and its Sephiroth and paths. Essentially, the correspondence of animals with the spheres and paths, or just in Liber 777. But from this single map alone can be found the underlying patterns of many legends and religious myths involving various animals and the qualities which they represent. So that just brings to mind this, just to try to jump into some of this. In Orion, the whole myth of Orion, essentially, which I don't have it up, but is kind of a playing out of this whole idea of Visha and Agata, or poison and an antidote or cure. And because like Orion plays a role with Scorpio, and Scorpio being the death, like attributed to the death card. Just the mythology speaks for itself. But the same guy who wrote this book about kind of the mythology of Orion and Nabi and navel connect to the whole, like not just the navel but the thread and the belt. The thread, especially the sacred thread, makes me think of the sacred bull. That's why I have all this stuff about the bull pulled up. But essentially, and he's the hunter, and kind of there's just this story playing out in the zodiac and in various myths, and which are like recensions of kind of not even just different stories, but possibly different archetypes, obviously, but historical potentially things, and it makes me think just like, again, I say Twilight language for a lack of having to say multiple other terms, but just the overlapping different narratives and different, you could say, lives and different incarnations, and that's essentially what the Ninth Arch is kind of, not, I wouldn't say about, but gives the impression of. Again, the way of the gray ones is what verse 87 says in the Ninth Arch. Reference to the gray ones suggests a connection with the starry wisdom sect. So essentially, he says associated with the sphere of Chozar, Neptune, which is Chakma, or the Qliphoth of Chakma, and with the Mav Zone itself. So Chakma, Hakma is 73, which I've mentioned going on in different ways when you add, hey to something, and it's the, but essentially Ha Chakma, the wisdom, which is Mahavidya. I ended up discussing all this in post 78, but now 87, the reflection of that. Again, there's lunar elements. Luna itself is 87. 78 is 1 through 12, the sum of 1 through 12. And just to illustrate it, there's the lunar reflection of 78 is 87. The 2, again, being kind of 1. The way of the gray ones. Not necessarily even, the gray ones as the grays, but the starry wisdom sect being those who, there's a certain grade or initiatory sort of hinting at, I think, that is going along with this. And it's, again, same with 87. Later on I'll get into the Madhu Vidya as, and Soma as essentially relating to this whole Nabi, navel, umbilicus, sacred thread, initiatory sequence, cycle, and this like relating to the tower of ultimately the whole series of the 80s, being Pe in Hebrew. There is some sort of like build-up or charging or kundalini sort of effect relating to the tower, and it's sort of the lightning strike and the Eye of Shiva symbolism, and this whole Soma concept. A lot of people, including Watson, have tried to find a physical even thing, even though if you read the Rig Veda, from what I've read of books about it, which I've finally gotten a copy of it, but it's it's such a deep thing in and of itself. I'm still trying to make sense of it, and there's various books. Again, the Vedic, there's 2 books called Vedic Mythology. I meant to distinguish 2 volumes by Alfred Hillebrandt, and one of these volumes is entirely about Soma, and then the others about some of the other Vedic deities and stuff. But then there's this much smaller text but thinner book, also called Vedic Mythology by A.A. McDonald or Arthur McDonald. And come to find out, Vedic mythology in one spelling can be 666. Oops. Vedic mythology. So I was making, and I'll just show it on the screen, but so yeah, come to find out, Orion and this Apis and Osiris together made O-Serapis. And so, and Kenneth Grant mentions how O-Serapis, which O or Omicron can be like the in Greek, just like hey can be the in Hebrew when added to like a word, the beginning of a word. There's O-Serapis is 666, and that was sort of like an icon of, I don't know, it's just crazy because the meaning of Orion, well, not the meaning, because Orion relates to actually like urine, but Hunter, he's the hunter. Hunter is 666, and that's sort of like one of the negative connotations of the man as like a destroying force, the destruction aspect of 666, and man, the number of man's connection to it, as kind of explored throughout this whole thing. But in a weird, not a weird way, but like the whole concept of man as a keeper of the garden, Pashupati, I believe it's called. Let's see what Pashupati would be. Is, and Shiva essentially is this garden, like makes me think of a gardener, but also like a keeper of animals and knower of, again, the traits and the sort of like the codes, the keys that certain animals have. It's like that's one of the things I've really explored, and like just a key to this whole thing is this concept. But anyway, from this single map alone can be found the underlying patterns of many legends and religious myths involving various animals and the qualities which they represent. These animal spirits are manifestations of the same forces to be absorbed and utilized by the shaman or magus, and therefore represent aspects of the universe, and therefore like the self, and Shiva, which is essentially the non-distinguished self of everything, in its denser aspects known as the plane of Asaya, the material world, to which the neshama or animal soul is relegated. This sphere of Malkuth, in which all the higher and subtler forces of all the paths and spheres coagulate into the pantacle or disk of the perceived crystallization of manifestation, Earth. Again, Malkuth being 496 equates literally with the body. Anyway, the perspective shift that comes along with essentially understanding each Sephiroth. I wouldn't say it's too difficult, but it's like, it's such a elementary but thing that actually has to take place individually for it to even be understood. And these sort of developmental paths and passages, rites of passages, if you will, relating to, again, these myths, if you will, and the playing out of time, the time cycle of, again, the 1 through 12, if you will, symbolically, and the reflection, looking back, which is what 87 makes me think of. Just that sort of looking back and seeing the shell of the past, if you want to call it the timeline, the shell of the spiral. Makes me think of what the whole long immaculated finger points to reference verse 29 of chapter 3. Again, 29 times 3 is 87. And it's like the immaculated finger of, I don't know, just of time. Because none of these things are really like this. I'm only looking at this after the fact. Has a linkage with the present verse through Mavam, or Mem, Vav, Mem, 86, a colored spot or blemish the diseased finger indicates. So again, like the time, like the effects of time. And what did 86 say? Show a evil woman floating on a yellow river. So again, 29. There is this weird flip in the number spectrum, and again, dealing with 1, or Kolel, if you want to call it that. The relationship between 0 and 1, and the reflection, I guess, if you want to call it, of what you call like forward and backward, or past, present, and the movement in time, the undulation. That's 2, that is 1. Makes me think of, I was just thinking today of how if you want to like think of infinity as like people think linearly of 1 through up to some infinite number, but the cycles event like still repeat, and so to get like you can get to the end by just looking at the beginning, which is, again, I don't know, it sounds crazy, but this it just, it feels like it needs to be said. It's what this whole blog post is, or not just this blog post, but this blog is a process of the animal spirits are intimately bound up with those of man after countless eons of close interaction and consumption. In a sense, the beast of human creation is fed by and built on the energy of the collective effort of all combined bestial energy put through the Saturnian clockwork of space-time, spirit, and matter. There seems to be a definite distinction in the natural quality of the Native American wolf or jackal trickster, sometimes conceived as a spider, especially also in certain African traditions, compared to the seemingly unnatural mechanical artificial intelligence version of what seemed to be a more Uranian quality, but nonetheless generally antithetical to the organic and more libertine panic or Dionysian devil. So I'm like distinguishing these different I wouldn't say anti-cosmic, but like just these adversarial forces. It should be remembered that along with the Rudolf Steiner distinguished Lucifer and Ahriman and Satan, and so I guess that comes to mind. But it should be remembered that along with the 10 Sephiroth and 22 paths, 32 in all, there is also the hidden 33rd degree of Thoth, the eye of the supernal triangle, which, being the all-seeing eye, combines all of the paths and wills, timelines below back into the unity of Kether. So again, the unity being equivalent to, like, the whole concept of Chakma, or Hakma, is that it approaches unity to the point it merges with it, essentially. I don't know, I don't want to just jump to that, but that's kind of what it ends up showing through that whole sequence of 1 through 12, if you want to call it that, in 78. Mesla, and Mesla comes to mind, the word, which is related to tarot, but is like fate, destiny, and your timeline. And so the unity of that sequence is what Chakma is intended to bring you to the approach of, which Kether being such a numinous, luminous, if you want to call it, like you just get merged into it, and then that if you let it, like I say, if you let it, but I'm just narrating sort of the somewhat of my thoughts regarding what I think it is. I don't know. It's just an approach or a precipice. No matter in what form or quality of matter, all emanation is inherently bound up in the web of the spider of manifestation. Every impression, even so much as a thought, is indelibly etched and encoded in the mirrored mirror, the egg or seed of Maya. And thus it is the astral light, not like represented by 9 or fullness itself, which contains within its charge the whole of its will to be diffused in its going. And so again, the formula that Crowley explored in Liber 73, but also his journals at the time, I think in 1923, if I remember correctly, the whole formula of go and how it relates to gods, and how they go, and the Ankh, essentially, but 73 being Gimel, Gimel and Ayin. I want to say numbers and letters at the same time, but and then come to find out how go is related again to the cow in Sanskrit, India, etc. Again, Krishna. There's just some. It's not just some. There's just so many threads to all this. With this knowledge, the serpent is thus understood as representative of the true light in the hollow automatic shells of 11, the cells or scales, AI, essentially Aleph Yod, which the light uses as its vessel or screen, essentially, canvas. These are the dual aspects of the devil, the double-headed serpent or Ida Pingala, whose interaction along the sushumna or spinal pillar, again, going back to this, if you read, like when I read the chapter on Soma and Appa, it's the cerebrospinal fluid and its fluctuation that so many different things come to mind, because the secret of the golden flower, but also really post, I forgot what number it is, but enemy number 1, where I read the thing about the unity or uniting the magnetic fields of the heart and the brain, literally creating a vortex, which relates so much in so many different ways with, again, 666 as being related to the heart and the mind, but also this torus hypercube. Again, way too much all at once, but when you kind of understand the depth of what these can apply to and how they kind of well, I don't know, there's just so many different ways, like you can, it's like I was just wanting to get a little bit of familiarity and comfortability. Now I see there's like so many overlapping different systems, if you want to call it that, and subjects that you can look at it through and that are like constantly interacting, I guess. Again, best symbolized by the different triple numbers and how interacting, like how all the numbers interact to make these formulas that stack. And I don't know, there's just, it's like cross, I don't want to say verifying, because it's not like I'm just trying to verify and confirm, but they're just compatible. It's like cross compatibility, finding these blanks and gaps and whatnot, like this whole, that forward and backward concept of time comes into play. And that's where I think this like understanding of the so-called torus hypercube, or the fourth dimensional cube, 666 is representative of the dimensions of, if I don't just want to say the fourth dimension and the inclusion of time, because it seems like I've said before, I believe the 3 dimensions get mirrored by time to make this hexagonal, seeming hexagonal prismatic effect that I don't want to just I don't know where to go from there. It's like so many, that's what 666 seems to represent, but yet there's this higher octave, if you want to call it that, manifold, that again, the extra 333, if you want to call it that, from 666 to 999. But each one of those 777, 888, and 999 particularly illustrate these higher dimensional like concepts that we've slowly been developing, including again optics and I don't want to keep going on and on. It's just I want to kind of hone it back in. But these are the dual aspects of the devil, blah blah blah. Whose interaction along the sushumna or spinal pillar illumine the Kundalini tower of Koth. This tower, the lightning, and how Soma essentially is this impulse that is at any given time kind of like it's a bound up force carrying through, I don't want to just say organic and fertile creatures, but there's some relationship there again with this, like, I don't know, just even I want to say carrying of the torch, but this concept of the scepter. It is the spirit in the animal that enlivens and thus ultimately controls the glyphothic material shell. So yes, like that's what I think to some degree the Soma is, and that's why you can't necessarily, I mean, I was going to say in the Vedic Rig Veda, there's like 2 types of Soma described, and one is they say is like the physical, one's symbolic. So I don't know. I'm just saying it's not something to be too hooked on, but I do think people try to just like they just try to get rid of bugs and animals, to not have to think about it or whatever the case may be. It kind of I don't know. I just want to say, I just think that maybe there's some sort of play that's being misapplied, if you want to. I don't know how else to describe it. In Mayan mythology, the devil and supreme death god was conceived of as a subterranean vampire called Camazotz, who lived in the House of Bats, or Zatzilaha. The root Zatzil, bat, an analog to the legend of the pit of Hades, Hell, or Sheol. The bat is of course related to the vampire, whose symbolism alone can and has taken up many volumes, and also carries the magical characteristic of seeing or hearing in the dark, i.e. occult vision, and relates to the tarot card of the Hanged Man, who both hangs upside down, symbolic of the reflection of the waters of darkness or the subterranean subconscious, and also the pulse of the blood. Mem being Mem, and then the Hanged Man, Jesus, the blood, the water, the wine. Along with the obvious relation to blood, Mem, water again. Again, in the chapter of the bloody sacrifice, Crowley explains the magical relevance of the blood as the life force, the undefined quality of which he hints, in which modern science is still yet to even begin to understand, i.e. the plasma light body which activates and inhabits the material body is of course the same astral light described in the chapter on the magical link. So again, that's what this thread, the magical thread, not just the magical thread, the sacred thread, I keep wanting to go there, but there's just a lot to that concept. This force has been known of under different names by every religious and mystical tradition, and is the actual magical force of all manifestation. So again, mana, or the white light, both kind of relate to 111. So clear and pure as to be nearly imperceptible if it weren't for the fact it is the complete fabric and substance of all materialization. And so it tends to hint towards itself, or point towards itself eventually. This all-pervading and omnipotent force is, of course, the white light of Kether, descending in its triform rays to formulate the dimensional matrix to manifest its infinite beauty, again, the heart of Tiferet, and through the prism it rays to create the rainbow Antakarana, coagulating into being, or ego, essentially. And again, ego is 78, I forgot, 1 through 12. As the legend goes, there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The 9 worlds or planes of various world universe myths correspond to the 9 numbers, and particularly the 9 chambers of Kabbalah, just mentioned, which contain the secret wisdom of each. They each represent the manifestation or externalization of the spiritual or internal hierarchy of the micro and macrocosms of mind and matter. In thus reviving this wisdom in the year 2012, see words, it is ironic that I have established a veritable link between all extant traditions and reactivating them, including the ancient Egyptian, Hebrew, Greek, Eastern, with all of what that includes, Mayan and Native American traditions, pointing ultimately to the chthonic and stellar traditions, which is what Kenneth Grant refers to as the deep ones, also the forgotten ones, which is in the past, but then the great old ones. So all of which seem to have either intuitively ascertained this wisdom without the advantage of being able to cross-check and connect with all others, because of the whole language barrier. Oh, and, technology, space-time. Now, the matter is largely ignored by both occult and magic researchers and practitioners, as well as scientists, anthropologists, and historians. Modernity has seemed to sever the living link between those living and those who have lived. but only for those who have lost the spiritual guidance and lifestyle which can be recovered. Again, that sort of thread in the whole navel, like when you think about not just the navel, but I don't know how, I really can't explain. I was just saying it can't really be gotten rid of. It can just ideologically be ignored. Though the illusion has been shattered, the knowledge of life and death, when ascertained, shows us that neither is to really be held on to or feared. To be alive for eternity would be a hellish eternal death of its own sorts, and to be eternally resting is already occurring, and yet still here we are. I like to just I've had different ways I've kind of made that sort of, I don't want to say assumption, but it's kind of like a point that I'm trying to illustrate enough to be able to reflect upon to then come up with a better view, I guess. But the light must shine in the darkness, and because essentially, like, I could go into detail, but it doesn't matter. It's just that there's got to be something said. Something's got to be said for just, I don't know. I think these notions don't get properly explored anyway. Even for myself, it's like difficult because partially I don't even want to. I want to move back to other I want to move back to other topics usually, but anyway. The light must shine in the darkness, and truly there is no actual darkness. For that which is not is nothing, and therefore even for empty space to instill distance between its contents implies that emptiness to be an indication of our lack of sensory apprehension thereof, rather than any literal emptiness we might easily like to ascribe. The mythology of the light and the dark are naturally involved in every tradition as well, as they go back to the very act of seed germination and the biological functions of plant and animal life. It should not be that difficult to see that both are necessary, as in every story without the problem to be overcome, the abyss to be crossed, or the villain to be defeated, there is no story. In every hero legend, there is usually a young aspirant who has either some unattainable goal or an unforeseen but coincidental event that forces him to put himself through a series of obstacles to obtain the necessary strength and discipline to strategically obtain this goal or find some answer to which will provide him with the key to the kingdom. There is also, accordingly, usually a series of further obstacles every course of the way, without which he would never obtain the necessary strength to reach the goal or successfully handle the key. Sometimes this even results in the loss of all else in the process, rendering the goal to seem unworth the means, or the key useless when the kingdom has already been sold or destroyed. Thus, the burden of the goal is understood generally to have been shrouded and kept far off for the reason not to be attained, but aspired toward. And the story is regenerated when recounted as a dream or legend to the next of kin. In referring to the dying god traditions of the Osirian Aeon, Crowley notes that all these ideas may be explained by reference to anthropology. But this is not their condemnation, but their justification. For the customs and legends of mankind reflect the true nature of the species. In the same way, animals reflect the true nature of their spiritual being in their behavior as well as their outward manifestation. By studying the aerodynamics of the bird, we better learned how to make flying craft. By understanding the qualities of venom, we discovered how to make anti-venom. In watching the battles and tactics of various hierarchical animal groups, we have come to be able to not only benefit ourselves, but also help them as well. If only we could actually make preservation and organic analysis a bigger priority than trade, profits, and tourism. As a friend of mine once said, and I have mentioned before, is that the fall from the Garden of Eden occurred when we turned it into a farm. Little do we know we aren't the farmers. Every ancient tradition also has a form of the alien or xenos or stranger. Even in the Egyptian tradition, Set, the god of chaos and confusion, was never specifically relegated as any specific type of animal or known animal, and generally chimerical, sometimes called the Set animal or Shah. He was sometimes represented as an unknown type of jackal, relating to the general view of that animal as a trickster type. In any case, the alien is a type of the beast. The beast being 96 and alien being 96, together 9 and 6 being 15, which is the devil card. Although not of the Neshama, Asaya realm, but of the Dothian Uranian sort, which is alien or strange to the known system. Again, like Clefothic in a sense. There's different meanings or attributions of what Clefothic can be. Again, I think it gets relegated to like this whatever one person has it as a dim view of their understanding of that. But anyway, distinction between the various races and types of aliens and spiritual beings has been severely muddled, but through understanding the basic levels of manifestation, much can be rather cleared up. Again, the four worlds, the Sephiroth, etc. To each Sephiroth or sphere is relegated a choir of angels, which represent the light or day side positive forces of manifestation, the angles of form. The demons would be the fallen or dark side, i.e. the subconscious and reverse aspects of these, known as the Qliphoth or shells. I don't know why that's there, but Crowley gives a good analogy regarding magic, which is given the number 11, being the control of the Qliphoth and sound, which conveys meaning through the modification of silence according to the energetic qualities of number or scale. The scales of the serpent are the 9 numbers which coalesce in an infinitude of ways to formulate Maya or manifestation. Thus, the knowledge of the serpent is really the knowledge of life and death, light and dark, showing the serpent and the egg, 0, to be 2 sides of the same coin. Bullion. Even in the ancient legends, the depictions, the cosmic egg is encircled by the serpent. And science has found human life is conceived by the union of the serpentine spermatozoa, which is the root, or has the same root as zodiac. And so Zoe, life. Zoo, obviously. And the female egg. So Zoo, and then ovo. There's a lot of O's. But anyway, the ancient Hebrew word for seed or sperm is also zro, analogous to our modern word for the seed or egg, or 0. Crowley talks a lot about that in Liber 51 about Atlantis. His political, I believe it's somewhat political, but social commentary. The serpent, being said to be the symbolic totem of knowledge, Doth, is anciently depicted as consuming itself, showing the apparent conquering of life and death, and being the path crossing Doth horizontally. Represent, well, this isn't a real tree of life, but anyway. Represents, as it does, the Egyptian legend of Apophis, the span of space-time in the horizon of eternal night and day, twilight, between and beyond time, so the loops, if you will, the coils. When the tree of life is viewed from an integrated perspective, which gradually comes from, again, the perspective shifts that come along with the pathwork of understanding essentially the tree of life and the Sephiroth as it's, I would say as it's meant to be, but it's, who's to say, it's like up to you. But Doth truly is the dot, literally in Hebrew it's Daleth and Tau, at the center of the toroidal matrix web. However, understood transdimensionally, this dot is also holonically at all other points. So, quantum, essentially, as with Kether, Tiferet, Yesod, and Malkuth. The toroidal disc is the pantacle outwardly manifesting Malkuth, projected through Yesod and Doth. The moons, screens or veils, by Tifereth, which is a lesser form of Kether, and thus the interface between macro and microcosms. And it just brings to mind how Kenneth Grant actually mentions that 807, which, again, this is post 87, so I'll just mention it, but there's kind of a rift or an opening, a veil, if you will, a portal, a gateway in that, but it's 474 Doth plus 333, the gateway, or the guardian, essentially, the screen, if you will, the grate of the gate of Doth. Quran's on, but it's also literally the word gatekeeper, as I've mentioned. And so the two moons, the twilight moon of the moon, and then Doth, symbolically, if you've seen those sort of like symbols of the moon with the crescents on the ends, sort of like Wicca moon, that's what comes to mind, but it's the twilight of time, and that sort of, again, relating to Soma, and what I've tried to describe as, with 78 at least, but 87 being the reflection of 78, which is Ha-Chakma and Mahavidya, the great wisdom, and the wisdom, etc. The knowledge of Chakma is wisdom, so just being able to see the knowledge of 87 as its reflection. Again, like I haven't even mentioned, but I don't want to have to mention it in every post, but all of my other past posts I mentioned this gradual, like I didn't start out with an interest in the reflective quality of these numbers, but there's sort of a source, if you will, like Jim Egan, and quoting extensively from John Dee, but this sort of pattern that if you take a grid of essentially 1 through 100, but you start it with at 0, and you turn it sideways, or like reverse it, essentially turn it sideways, so you have 1 through, or 0 through I believe 9, like down, and then all the way down to 99. The numbers perfectly reflect each other with the double numbers, like 11, 22, 33, 44, all the way down to 99. And there's just this tessellated reflective nature to numbers that I didn't necessarily know about, but considering Friedrich Chod's like whole key of the Book of the Law with 13 and 31, and the anomalies related to that, I'll just summarize with 418. Again, the like when you add 13 through 31 and how that's 418, Cheth, and the various keys related to the Book of the Law, essentially. I didn't even realize all of that until slowly I've seen this. So again, just considering that to try to summarize that whole baggage of what I'm trying to refer to. There's something, I'm just going to say, like this 87, there's something to this, it's like almost like, I don't want to just say this cross connection between the simple numbers and their bigger display, like another, how do I say it? It's basically where digital, it's like figurate numbers, or figurate numbers, how numbers can make figures, but then further, those figures can actually become manifestations, essentially. Going back to the zodiac and these twilight language analogies, again with the ninth arch as a case in point, these numerical, like it's like stardust, if you will, the points being, what are they? Well, it goes back to, if it's numbers, well, what is the numbers? Well, it's light in seeming darkness, but again, this paradox of it's a perplexing thing, but quoting again, or I first to bring it up in this whole thing, but reflecting back to the Mullah Mahdi Amakarika of Nagarjuna and his the contributions that brings to the resolution of the false pretenses that we kind of implore all this stuff and impose on ourselves when, I don't know, it's just that comes to mind. It's like shatters all that bullshit. But yet there is this, there's some sort of, if you want to call it truth or practicality to these numbers and these codes. So again, what is what? So it's almost like the samsara of the wheel, and then the liberation. It's kind of what they say in some of these texts. It's like it's a choice in a sense, like and it's up to you as to what's more comfortable, I guess. And that's kind of like the analogies in the Tibetan Book of the Dead of the inability to change the mind of people suffering in the flames of hell, because it's like that's where they're comfortable. Again, as an analogy or whatever, but the spheres of the pillars help to balance and give energetic quality to these fundamental elements. The middle pillar, however, is the primary magical link or astral thread, which is only to be utilized when the center of Tiferet has been attained, known as the knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel. So again, this sort of unity, the link, I would say best depicted by Frater Achad in the Anatomy of the Body of God, where the sort of seed of Kether recurring through the link of Tiferet, but in Malkuth as a sort of seed in a link. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but the image comes to mind of that sort of vesica with the tree of life fractal, if you want to call it that. That's what I see as what these terms represent. It's easy to just say and reread and hear that, but to know what it refers to is different. It takes a while, but until this has been attained, any attempts to communicate with anything beyond oneself will be either useless or detrimental. So again, it's that moving forward in Mesla, in the 78, with the ego, without being able to reflect, having that time to reflect and see the clefothic quality of the act itself, can be detrimental. The glass ceiling of Thoth can only be transcended through the hidden light, which is not trapped by space-time. So again, that's where that whole choice of sort of like nirvana and samsara come in. Because I think we do have a capacitor, just like with the moons, if you want to call it that. I say capacitor, but a sort of oscillation between I can't remember the analogy in what Lieber Crowley refers to it, but it's sort of like a slide valve. We have a slide valve with samsara and nirvana. For this reason, it is also useless to ask for physical proof of spiritual phenomena, as it is intended to be apprehended on its own plane, though on occasions we may catch a glimpse of breaches in the matrix and kinks in the web, but usually only for a short time. So again, this whole idea of Mandela effects, which again I find just laughable to a degree, but then there's some sort of irregular, like there's something to them that I think that may just be something we need to consider looking at over time, because there may be anomalies that with certain technologies, like they could be signatures. It is the entire premise of magic that the outward superficial level of reality is to be changed through the knowledge of its internal and underlying formulae. So again, this goes to my theories, or if you want to call it like what I've been contemplating going back, and why this post is taking forever, but in post 86, the whole concept of Shambhala, the Pure Land, and these terms, but this idea of, say something changes and then there's almost no, it's a seamless thing, like, how do I explain it? In a sense, incarnation itself is very seamless seeming, and I think that it's just, I mean, not just I mean, the thinking has already been done. There's a lot of sutras that mention some of these same things that, again, just the Kanda Maharoshana Tantra just popped into mind in particular, because when you actually read that and kind of just get over the weirdness of some of the things, it kind of hints at a sort of cosmology of passing in and out of incarnations. So like almost like bees and flower, like bees going to flowers comes to mind, but in some weird walk-in sort of way. The ancient Mayans and Egyptians didn't worship the serpent as such. They revered the underlying essence that the serpent symbolically embodied. In a similar but opposite way, Christians don't fear snakes as such, so much as they fear the knowledge it represents, which with one drop of its anti-venom could destroy much of its falsity, though also prove much of the wisdom it contained to be essentially correct, in the sense that children's fables are not true, but the truths which they embody nevertheless convey, or can be conveyed. 666, for example, as I've shown, is Quetzalcoatl, the serpent of the Mayans, which is the same as that of the biblical Genesis serpent myth. Incidentally, I am part Sioux Native American, and the tribe's name means little snake, and their symbol, known as the medicine wheel, is that of the mark of the beast, or essentially the fly-foot cross, etc., which is a form of the swastika coagulated together as the elements to form manifestation. This symbol represents also the gate of matter, and the devil card is also known as the Lord of the Gates of Matter, i.e. Maya. I have already written extensively on the subject of alien disclosure. See Visions of the Past, Transmissions from the Future, The Silent Calling, and Clearing the Airwaves. It should be apparent that for higher dimensional experiences and information to be relevant, it must be grasped on its own level. Too much confusion comes from the confusion of the planes and the need by the uninitiated for physical proof or evidence of non-physical or metaphysical phenomena, without taking the necessary steps to be able to apprehend it effectively. Three-dimensional limitations and being caught in the current of Chronos, time and its dilation, does not easily allow for transdimensional and timeless states of information, unless, it can be that slide valve comes to mind again, but through cultivation of the astral body, these obstacles may be overcome. The boundary between the astral or diamond body and the ego is distinguished over the course of the beginning mainly, but throughout initiation. But apparently there are dangers involved that can accelerate, essentially, death. This is the plasma body alluded to by Crowley in the chapter on blood, which science is still yet to quantify in physical terms, because it is much like trying to measure a dream building with a physical tape measure. The state in between waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, void, has been discussed throughout this publication, and with heavy references to the Mauve Zone of Kenneth Grant, the fourth state of being associated with Thoth on the Tree of Life, and the final He, or daughter aspect of Tetragrammaton, and of course the fourth state of matter plasma in the fourth dimension, generally attributed as time. It is through the opening of this gateway in the four worlds of creation that the double window of the receptive He is opened, that the hatch in the egg is opened for ingress and egress of trans-dimensional data. As Crowley notes, the aura or body of light, i.e. astral double, astral body, diamond body, rainbow body, etc., is the true source of power for the magical weapons and ceremonies. It is the circle itself, which is the source and field of the electric power of 666, i.e. the star or aster, 666, soul, the cosmic fire. This is rayed prismatically from the egg, the O, essentially the robe or the crown. Yeah, so which is also one with the crown of Kether, and its 3 rays beginning with Aleph, Lamed, Pe. The Fool, who is also the O, or the egg, who falls into manifestation and through the full cycle or circuit of initiation becomes the magician who is one in the tarot. But also Beth, which is 2. Beth is the house, the habitation or temple, i.e. the body and environment. The white light, 111 of the aura, reflects outwardly. The eye of the dragon of Thoth looks inward as well as outward, projecting the mask of Malkuth, ego, or the formulation of identity. Malkuth is also 111. 107, being the value of identity, is the crystallization of egg. It implies the 4 elements also. But 222, being the reflection of the inner light against itself, is Atman Samadhi, the self-samadhi or self-realization, which becomes apparent as dravya, substance or composition. 222 is also the formula of Dhyani Pasa, the divine rope or veil, the ring past knot between the phenomenal world and noumenal cosmos. It makes me think of the whole, not just the Sri Yantra, but the Kamakala Vilasa, which describes essentially the Sri Yantra. 333, the next chamber in the index represents the 3 main time stations, or states of time, of the Kala Chakra wheel. It is the time loop of the Higgs boson, which is the fundamental element of the thread of the fabric of reality. Fabric is also 222, which Kenneth Grant called Shilba, a resolution of self and not self in a third neither, which generates altogether alien formulae in their combination and conquering, generating a vacuum or vortex, as it were. 333 being also the root or reduction of sigil, as Shin Gimel Lamed, and the formula of that mode by which it is said to be most effective in which to perform a sigil implant into the akasha by way of the subconscious, i.e. with the object or the objected aim being that through such stimulation of the sigil of your willed formula becomes not only ingrained but also energized as a sort of battery, essentially a fertilized seed, for the vacuum or vortex to alter the prism and its projection accordingly. Thus, it is the gatekeeper of the 3 time and mind zones and the boundaries of the various levels of manifestation. Being also ground, it is where the 3 triads of the tree ground out into outward form. It's also the seed, literally, 333 is the seed, which grows in the ground. So, next in the series of the harmonics of the literal Kabbalah is the lost key of the secret book, or book of shadows, of magic. So this archetypal book being hinted at as 444. Much in the same way that 333 tells how to formulate a sigil and energize it, 444 tells literally how to cast a spell through the secret tongue, or numerical language, by encoding the elements whose resonance you intend to utilize or affect in writing a spell in the magic spell book. Gematria teaches magic if you know how to use it and if you can get beyond the symbol to what the symbol symbolizes. The keys, so again, the soma, the Madhu Vidya of the soma, the honey knowledge, the impulse, the motivation in a sense, like the sphota of the Divani. The keys can also be locks, and thus they will remain as mere boundaries between the outward mask and inner reality for those unready, unwilling, or unable to understand. 555 is the middle chamber, and thus can be thought of like the king's chamber in which the coffin was placed. Apparently not for any actual deceased mummy, but most likely for the symbolic Masonic illumination of going into the Amenta for a period and being resurrected by spirit, and then again in the material world. 555 is the Luciferian initiation of the fallen or sleeping light of the soul, which according to legend was the cornerstone of creation and the highest angel. It makes me think of the laser and all the stuff in the Ancient Secret as well, because 555 relates to so many different Grail legend things. But 555 is the night side of Eden, the obverse side of the tree called the Citra Akra, or Citra Ara, the tree of death. In Kabbalah, Qliphoth, and Goetic magic, a chapter is given about the nature of 5 being concomitant with the forces of the separation from the original unity to give way to for creation. Through this fracture of the fractals is generated a quantum universe. The true quantum particle of the egg is merely the manifestation of Nuit in the expansion of Had or Hadit. Again, Had being in Hebrew spelled in full is 555, which I later found out that Hadit spelled in full is 999, which is also Therion with none final. 666 is the circle of the cosmic fire of the magical child of Nuit and Hadit manifested as the solar intelligence, Sorath, and as the numerous light bearers among men on earth. 666 is the immortal soul known in Thelemic terms as the ever-coming one, who has both a positive or active aspect as well as a negative passive aspect as Horus and Set or Harpocrates. The integration and balance of these forces helps to balance the entire Ruach and middle pillar. And again, makes me think of the fluctuation or the flux mentioned regarding soma and the cerebrospinal fluid. And thus Malkuth or manifestation directly. The source of much of the sorrows and manifestation arise from a blockage and confusion of the Sephiroth and the inability to even see beyond Malkuth, which requires a necessary looking inward. Beyond the mental imagery of Yesod and the self-nature of Tifreth through the reflecting pool of Doth, past the ugly statue of Kether from the Egg of Infinity only leads back around to the same center all at once but in different stages in their own planes of densification. 666 being the key of the keys to the abyss is thus the key to all power in all reality constructs operative in its crystalline mainframe. Being the Akashic Records, it is the library card to all knowledge of Doth. 777 comes together to form the Anta Karana Ruach Rainbow, or Rainbow Bridge, as the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life that comprise the Ruach are all the colored ones, excluding Malkuth, which is basically a synthesis of all the above inner spheres. I say coagulated, but there's other ways you could say that. It's almost like a brain state where kind of when you wake up in the morning or when you're in certain tired states where the tendency to zone out. It's kind of an analogy of what Malkuth is. Being that it is the Olam HaQliphoth, or the world of shells, the Qliphoth, it is also the forces of the night side or subconscious as well, and thus the broken shells, which are said to be used for the recreation of the universe, again the simulacra, after its last destruction, or the fall, in digital, the Kabbalah of manifestation, the vast expanse of the light world, i.e. reflections or shells. Magically, our body is our temple and our altar on the physical plane, and our astral body is our shamanic spaceship, your your own, I think, magical egg, which Crowley gives Liber O as a treatise. Again, it's Liber 6 because the O, and 6 being Tifereth, but also the hexagram. It's kind of just bringing that sort of to the heart. But 777 also contains the magician's keys of gematria keys and formulas, as it is the Encyclopedia of Gematria Codes, which Crowley began, and I have expanded upon with Greek and other formulas, which all retain their own consistency as well as correspond uniquely with each other. Whereas 666 is the key of the evolution of man, i.e. the Homo sapien evolution, the next link in the evolutive sequence of the chambers, as 777 is the proof of evolution. 888 is a formula of the Akashic egg of Maat, and the Azoth, the astral fluid which formulates or gestates manifestation. Being also Isus, Jesus, and Harpocrates. Harpocrates represents the dual aspect of the 444 cross of the elements in the Chaos Starstone of the globed priest. So, again, the inward, the sort of, I called it, what is it, the VR orb? Like, I forgot, I think it's Oculus. They have these little orbs. The VR orb, and how you can like jump into worlds and then come back out of them and they're orbs. That's like, it's the fact that it's 888, and then it's an analogy for what kind of 888 to me represents. It's just, I would have to pull up a video to show what I'm talking about. But the Ogdoadic zone, the octave, is also related to Thoth, counting up from Malkuth, and known as the false crown, which is presided over by Abraxas in the Gnostic tradition. So again, this diversion, if you will, of time, space and time, of the fall into this sort of this Ogdoadic. It's what Jesus kind of represents with his whole saving from this Goff, as it's called in Hebrew. Or Goff comes to mind at least, but it's 89. So that's upcoming. But it's basically this. It's related to what they call the seventh heaven, but it's like where the souls that are not yet incarnate are, and so there is some sort of diversion, or you could call it like makes me think of the human alien, the cloning or whatever, or the hybridization program. I don't know. I mean, there's some relation to those concepts, but in Health and Human Services, in Area 51 being connected. But anyway, just kidding. The Gnostic Demiurge is 888. The sword of lightning and the serpent of wisdom are both necessary elements. As Jesus said, he came not to bring peace, but a sword. And with his mouth also. And I didn't know this would come up, but 87 being again Pe, the mouth, and Zayin, the sword. It's kind of right there, but and to be wise as serpents, essentially Gnostic Luciferian keys to illumination via the double power of the double wand of Kaphnia, the balanced dual contending forces, micro, macro, inward, outward, of manifestation. 999 being technically the highest chamber of the traditional Kabbalah of 9 chambers is thus significantly the key in Hebrew spelled in full. So Mefthak, and the letters being in their full values. And like I said, Hadit also. The fullness or pleroma of Periago, perfection. O apparatos, the secret, and To apaton, the unspeakable or the inexpressible, Cosmikos Sophia, cosmic wisdom, which is just beyond and between the numeric chambers or cells, but which they act as information condensers for. 999 being the full circle is thus the alignment and reparation of the 666 beast man fall complex in the higher power of the true spirit beyond but within the material form. Thus, 999 is the subtle body, willed into manifestation, as 999 being the key of the key, is the number of the key of it all. Manifestation and perfection together, as 999, are the key word formulas of what Frater Achad termed the eon of truth and justice. These literal codes right here, which he said was made known to him in a lesser cycle he also termed the incoming of the eon of Mayat. Both of these forms, when, again, Hebrew is applied to English, are 989. Before knowing any of this, I happened to take an oath of self-initiation on September 9th, 2009, and then had an experience after I decided to buy an obsidian egg for no apparent reason other than that it intrigued me when just beginning to read the books of Kenneth Grant, particularly Outside the Circles of Time, which I had got that week, that I realized the very day I chanced to obtain the gold egg without haggling was April 2nd, 2011, right before the 107th year of the Eon of Horus and the number of the egg of Ma-Ion Achad prophesied in 1948 on the same date. This talisman is thus served to open the gateway of initiation further for an influx of the Mayashan tide of trans and hyperdimensional forces, formulae and data for the advent of human and organic transhuman as opposed to synthetic transhuman development. But I just wanted, because I was curious and I forgot to look it up, but in the Book of Lies, Liber 333, 87 is where this little sigil, which he says is a sigil taken from a Gnostic talisman and refers to the sacrament. And again, the sacrament relates, in my mind, to the Naivedya and the offering and the Madhu Vidya, the Soma, essentially, Soma sacrifice. The moon, there's some, I don't want to just say ancient, but yeah, the Rig Veda itself being essentially one of the oldest texts, if not the oldest text, whenever I was translating the Tantra Loka, I kept having these deep visions, I guess you'd say, glimpses of a fire, and it seemed like an enclosed fire, and I sensed a presence, and it felt very archetypal or shamanic. It sounds dumb to talk about, but basically coming to find out what the Rig Veda is all about, I'm glad I went through the Tantra Loka and had my sort of inner fire, I guess, ignited. I don't know how else to describe it. But it's 87. It makes me think, I mentioned 89 and the Goth and the Gnostic. There's a Gnostic connection to that whole concept. Again, the Gnostics and have such a bad retarded rap at this point. People don't understand that they can't get beyond that duality, essentially. It's just a shame, but anyway, the chapter 87 is called Mandarin Meals, and it says, there is a dish of shark's fins and of sea slug, well set in birds' nests. Oh. So, and there's also there's a souffle most exquisite of chow chow. These did I devise, but I have never tasted anything to match the which she gave me before she went away. March 22nd, 1912. This chapter is technically one of the Layla chapters. It means that however great may be one's own achievements, the gifts from on high are still better. This sigil is taken from a Gnostic talisman and refers to the sacrament. So again, the gifts from on high makes me think of, again, Mesla 78, but again, this sort of, I say reverse, because 87 is obviously the reverse, but it's not really what I mean and what I want to say. But see it as like I see it in my own life with this post and the timing as just being a looking back and being able to see, like, I don't want to just say with accomplishment, but just seeing how with wisdom, if you just like waited and sat back and look, then eventually you'll reach that sort of pure land in a sense, or like paradise, just in the sense of just, oh well, I guess this is what it means to not have to worry about that anymore. But that's, I don't know, none of that has, that's just my own personal take on this, but that's how I see, because I really didn't understand what this meant at first. I thought about it for a little while and forgot to come back to it. But there's a dish of shark's fins and of sea slug, well set in birds' nests. So again, it makes me think of the eggs and what they can contain. Also, there's a souffle most exquisite of chow chow. What is chow chow? Okay, so pickled. Bullshit. So again, it makes me think of that sort of glyphothic egg. But I don't know, 87, it's been a weird one for me, because I know it's, while it's UPA, which means above or whatever, it's also UAP, and it's got that 5 amplification of 82, which was UFO, and how I mentioned code, but code with a cheth would be 87. So, and the whole UFO code cryptology connection, cryptography. I don't know, FOIA comes to mind. And I really didn't have any connection to it until now, but Zio. But Zion being just like that high point. Zion also in Hebrew having been that 86, so that one more, like I was just talking about 807, and I was talking about Zion and its relation to Shambhala in 86, so again, I don't know, it's just some weird, oh yeah, and how Vritra comes to mind. Vritra, which again is the sort of the evil force in the Vedas. The Rig Veda in particular. So yeah, he's symbolic of drought, because it's the stopping of the flow, again, of the soma. And soma and the moon, it has everything to do with the flow, the flux of not just water, but life itself. Incarnation. So that's why I see 87 as sort of kind of just being like just being on one side of, I guess, that the wheel, and being able to look back and not, at least for one go, to be able to know what's happening the next go. And I don't know, I just see it as karmic. It's all karmic. Off to 88.